Something we get asked a lot, in fact, whenever I'm sitting in a taxi or an Uber and the conversation turns to what do I do, invariably I get asked, what's the future of the property market? What's going to happen? Is it going to boom again? Are we in a bubble? Is it going to crash? And so what I wanted to do now is actually just whiz you through quickly our take on the market. So this chart is up on our website. It's actually a really important chart. It's very hard for you to read, and I understand that. And the reason why it's important is the future of property is actually a lot more certain than most people understand. And that's because most people don't study history. We're very keen students of history, myself and our research team, so we really study what's gone on in previous cycles, going back many, many years, many decades, even hundreds of years. And this is our description of the real estate cycle. So this is up on our website, as I mentioned. And typically when we take groups through this, we spend probably 40 or 50 minutes on it. So it does get quite technical, but also something we would love to do is come back and spend some more time with you and take you through this, because once you've seen it and you understand it, it's actually, I think it's one of those epiphanies like Tax Freedom Day and Mortgage Freedom Day. It gives you a lot of confidence about where we are. You can actually block out a lot of the negative noise in the media at the appropriate times, and just really helps you understand how things work. So we're not going to cover it in a great detail today, but a couple of key points, and that is that we believe that fortunes are built on understanding market cycles. So very important to understand this stuff, because you can trade it from not only a property perspective, but also a share perspective. But I'll give you a quick introduction. So the cycle typically occurs across 18 to 20 years, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's not terribly well understood, because if you consider adulthood to be roughly 20 years old, if this cycle is typically 18 to 20 years, you really only get 3 of them in your adult life. So they unfold relatively slowly, so I think that actually makes them somewhat easy to miss. I think something else that's quite interesting is, as an economy, Australia doesn't create its own cycle. Australia really follows the US. The US is the world's largest economy, so the US really drives what's going to happen here and what happens in our property cycle. Typically, we're about 12 to 18 months, probably more like 12 months behind the US. So if you want to know what's going to happen in property in Australia, a very good proxy for that is actually looking at what's going on in the US. And you can see we've actually divided the cycle into 4 phases and 24 stages. What I've done with this chart is I've simplified the cycle. So this should be a little bit easier for us to understand, and we can whiz through it pretty quickly. So the cycle has 2 expansionary phases and 2 recessionary phases. And the first phase we call the first upswing and return to growth, which is the first expansion here. That's what you can see here. And this is more or less what we experienced, what we've lived through from about 2011 to 2018. So coming out of the GFC, we've really gone through this first expansion here. And obviously during that time, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, we've seen prices grow, real estate grow quite considerably during that period. Now, the two growth phases are actually separated by a phase that we call the mid-cycle slowdown, which is the first recessionary phase. So this was always in our models, and we were really predicting this for around 2019, 2020. And that's more or less the phase that we've been in at the moment and that we're currently experiencing. So we've actually seen this hiatus in property price growth. We've seen prices pull back somewhat in certain areas, and we've really seen prices take a bit of a breather. And our view is that we'll come out of that roughly in the middle of next year, so in about 2020. And from 2020 through to about 2027, we're going to go through this second expansion or boom phase, and then that will be followed from about 2027 to about 2031 by this peak crash and recovery phase, which is really what we saw during the GFC. So, look, this mid-cycle slowdown, typically we see a lot of commentary from economists and the papers saying that we're entering a bear market and the boom's ended. They're looking forward to lower economic growth, increased unemployment. But based on what we've studied and all the cycles we've studied historically, not only in Australia but around the world, what we've seen is that this phase is typically quite mild and we move through it fairly quickly. Like I said, it's typically about 12 to 18 months. Then we move into this boom phase, and typically property prices grow more strongly in the second boom than they do in the first boom.